The headlights cut through the fog on an empty roadside as a teenage hitchhiker, Jack, trudged along. His clothes were soaked, his body exhausted. He'd been traveling for hours, haunted by guilt and desperation, fleeing a home he couldn't return to. Jack was running from the truth of what he'd done. Hours earlier, he and his girlfriend Lena had gotten into a fight, a terrible final argument. In a heated moment, he'd lost control. Now, in his frantic escape, he planned to call home and create an alibi, hoping to fool everyone into believing he'd been far from the scene when it all happened. In the darkness, he spotted an old phone booth on the roadside, shrouded in mist. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, and yet the faint hum of a dial tone invited him inside. He hesitated, but then stepped in, shutting the glass door behind him. He dialed his home number, praying for the line to connect. The phone clicked, and a strange, static buzz filled his ear, then cleared. What he heard next chilled him to his core. "Jack," said a voice on the other end. It sounded like him. Exactly like him. "Get out of town now. Don't turn back." Panicked, Jack dropped the phone and yanked open the door, desperate to escape. But when he stepped outside, he wasn't where he'd been just moments before. The fog had grown thicker, and the landscape had transformed. The road, the trees, even the sky, everything was somehow wrong. He walked forward, feeling an uneasy sense of déjà vu as he wandered into what looked like the town he'd left behind. But this wasn't the same place. Buildings were dark, windows broken. Shops that had been bustling earlier now stood empty, their signs hanging by rusted chains. Jack turned and saw the phone booth, standing at the corner of the deserted street. He felt a compulsion pulling him back, as though the booth itself were alive, urging him to try again. Heart racing, he stepped inside and picked up the receiver. "Jack," the voice said again, clearer this time, sounding not just like him, but weary, defeated. "You can't change what happened. She's gone. Run before it's too late." Terrified, Jack opened the door, stepping back out only to find himself in a yet darker version of the town. Buildings leaned at odd angles, and the fog clung to the ground like a thick, suffocating blanket. The eerie silence pressed on him, almost as if the whole town were holding its breath. And then he saw her. In the middle of the street stood Lena, her eyes wide, pale and unmoving, as though she were a ghost caught in a memory. She raised her hand, pointing back toward the booth. Her mouth moved, though no words escaped. Jack sprinted back to the booth, terrified yet unable to ignore the compulsion to make another call. He dialed again, hoping for answers. "Jack," his own voice answered, now almost pleading. "You can't escape. You're trapped, just like she is. You're part of this place now." He shouted back at the voice, begging it to let him go, to tell him how to escape. The phone line crackled with static, and then the line went dead. Panicking, Jack staggered out of the booth, only to see the town even more twisted than before. Shadows stretched across the ground like reaching hands. Distorted figures lingered in doorways, their faces blurred and undefined, watching him. Each step he took, each glance over his shoulder, only brought him back to that phone booth. As he reached the booth once more, the fog thinned slightly, and Jack felt a strange clarity wash over him. He remembered something, the feeling of a distant memory coming into sharp focus. The call. Just 5 minutes before his fight with Lena, he'd received a call. Static had filled the line and he'd brushed it off, thinking it was just a random glitch. But now he understood. That call had come from him. Here, trapped in this endless loop. It was him, trying to warn himself, to prevent everything from spiraling out of control. With newfound determination, Jack picked up the phone and dialed his own number in the past. As the phone rang, he took a deep breath. praying that this time he'd succeed. When the line connected, he spoke with a voice full of urgency, his words cutting through the static. "Jack, listen to me. Don't let anger take control. Don't go back to Lena. Leave now, before it's too late." He waited, hoping his past self would hear, hoping the warning would change everything. But as the silence grew, he realized he was speaking into the void. The line went dead, and he was left alone, his own voice echoing in his ears. The fog grew thicker around the booth, pressing in from all sides, and Jack knew he was too late. He would remain trapped here, bound to the booth, endlessly making calls that no one would answer. For eternity, Jack's voice would drift through the static, a faint whisper on the line, forever warning a past version of himself that he could never reach. If only he had listened.